The bride never showed up, but the ceremony continued. And when the chapel doors opened, everyone turned to see who was wearing the white dress. But it wasn't who they expected. It was her. The maid, the invisible one. The girl who served coffee, cleaned the floor, and was only referred to as that girl. And yet, in that moment, with steady eyes and a heart at war, she walked to the altar. And no one dared to stop her. Before you dive into this story, subscribe now to the channel so you don't miss any of our Korean emotions. This is your free dorama channel here on YouTube. Harin never had a room with a door. She slept behind the laundry room on a thin mattress, surrounded by the noise of the boilers and the smell of soap. Even so, every morning, she put on her navy blue uniform with care, as if she were putting on an invisible armor. She served tea to the matriarch, listened to the muffled shouts of the master of the house, and pretended not to hear the whispers of the rich sons every time she passed by. Mr. Han, owner of one of the largest private clinic networks in Seoul, never learned the name of the girl who grew up in his house, cleaning the marble staircase and collecting the silverware no one else touched. To him, she was just another discreet cog in his perfect home. But to Ji-woo, his eldest son, she had always been a dissonant note in the suffocating symphony of the family. Ji-woo was about to marry Min Seo, heiress of an international hotel chain. It was the wedding of the year, sealing not only two fortunes, but also two reputations. Every newspaper spoke of the dress designed by a Milanese stylist, the ceremony in a rooftop garden overlooking the Han River, and the confirmed presence of politicians and celebrities. Except Harin, who was still scrubbing the floor of the main hall with her soap-reddened hands. But in that house where everyone ignored her, there were eyes that saw too much. The matriarch, Mrs. Yoon, an elegant and cruel widow, observed the girl with the kind of suspicion only experienced women carry. It wasn't love, nor jealousy. It was something more ancestral, the fear that a single piece out of place could collapse the entire board. Harin wasn't naive. She knew she was where she shouldn't be. She knew she shouldn't smile when she caught Ji-woo's gaze, nor keep his perfumed handkerchiefs in her apron pocket. But there was something in his gestures, a rare kind of gentleness in that house, of invisible walls that lit a silent courage in her. As if for a moment, she wasn't the maid, but someone who also deserved to be seen. The problem is that being seen comes at a price. And Ji-woo's gaze became a dangerous beacon. It started with forgotten notes, then a flower in her apron, and then an unexpected invitation to retrieve something from his room. Nothing happened, but everything changed. Min Seo noticed. And that was enough for hell to break loose. The perfect bride, with her porcelain posture and meticulously trained smile, tolerated no interference. She had Harin removed from the house weeks before the wedding, said it was for security reasons. She said this while looking straight into Gi-woo's father's eyes, as if demanding flawless room service. Harin was taken out in silence, without protest, like someone who understands her place. But fate, that capricious writer, doesn't always follow the script of the powerful. A week before the ceremony, Min Seo disappeared. She left a cold note saying she couldn't bear marrying out of convenience. She left for Paris, and took with her the secrets she held about the Han family. Secrets that, if revealed, could destroy. More than just a name, with the ceremony scheduled, guests paid, and the press mobilized. Canceling the wedding would be a public humiliation. Mrs. Yoon, more ruthless than ever, ordered that no one know about the escape. "The bride will come," was the only sentence spoken that morning, but there was no bride. Only a memory. It was Ji-woo who suggested it, not as a plan, but as a confession. What if it were her? He murmured, looking at the garden where Harin was, her head down, picking up fallen petals from the decoration. His mother didn't respond immediately. She merely let her wine glass tremble lightly in her hand. The dress was already ready. The vows rehearsed, the press positioned, the altar set. All that was missing was someone brave enough to walk down the aisle, knowing the whole world would hate her for it. And Harin, strangely calm, accepted, not for love, but for something greater, for dignity, for existence. That morning, Harin wore the wedding dress as one wears a scar. There was no sparkle in her eyes, no romance, only resolve. This was a story without heroes or villains. Only broken people trying to maintain appearances. As she walked down the hall under bewildered stares, frozen smiles and venomous whispers, Harin didn't see Ji-woo. She saw all the versions of herself that tried to survive inside that house. The girl who cried behind the door. The young woman who swallowed her own voice. The woman who now dared to say yes, even when the world said no. The photographer hesitated to click. One of the groomsmen cleared his throat in protest, but no one moved. Because no one knew what to do with a woman who, even wounded, dared to occupy a place that was never given to her. The ceremony continued in silence. A heavy, thick, almost sacred silence. Ji-woo extended his hand to her as if trying to hold a ghost. And she accepted as someone who had already lost everything, and, for that reason, feared nothing. Mrs. Yoon closed her eyes for a second. Not in approval, but to avoid collapsing. She knew that, from that moment on, nothing would be the same. Outside the chapel, it began to rain. As if the sky were washing away what men would never have the courage to clean. The maid had taken the bride's place, but that story was just beginning. Harin didn't expect applause, nor did she expect acceptance from those who witnessed that ceremony with glassy eyes and silent judgments. As she crossed the reception hall holding a bouquet that wasn't hers, all she could hear were the echoes of her footsteps between the stained glass windows. The weight of the dress felt heavier than it should have been. Perhaps it was the weight of all the untold stories, the averted gazes, the words that had always remained stuck in her throat. That wasn't a celebration of love. It was a substitution, a maneuver, a heresy delicately wrapped in white flowers and paper promises. The reception went on as if nothing had happened. The press was kept at a distance with cold justifications about a last-minute change. The Han family smiled as if they hadn't just buried their pride. Ji-woo kept an expressionless face, his eyes fixed on Harin like someone trying to remember why he started something he no longer knew how to finish. As for her, she just breathed. A simple gesture, but one that now felt like an act of survival. That night, the new couple was taken to the private wing of the mansion. The house where Harin had spent her entire life as a shadow now welcomed her as the central figure, but the walls don't forget, nor do the portraits hanging on the stairs. With every step, she felt the judgment of the hallways, as if the furniture whispered, "You don't belong here." And deep down, she thought so too. The bridal suite was a replica of a 5-star hotel room, everything calculated, nothing authentic. Ji-woo entered in silence, taking off his tie as if tearing away an invisible chain. He sat at the edge of the bed and stared into the void for long minutes. Harin remained standing, not knowing where to place her hands, her body, or her fear. They were married, officially, but it was a fiction. And worse, a fiction both had agreed to perform. "You were the one who chose this," she said, in a whisper almost lifeless. "I chose not to lose everything," he replied, still not looking at her. The silence between them was a minefield. Every word was a threat, every glance, a reminder of what had never been said. Harin wanted to hate him for putting her there. But she couldn't, because a part of her, the part that was still the little girl, alone, behind the kitchen door, still felt something for him. Even now, even after everything. The next morning, the rain persisted as if the sky was in mourning. Harin descended the stairs wearing formal clothes, chosen by a housekeeper who now addressed her with "ma'am" on her lips but contempt in her eyes. Breakfast was served with pomp, but without words. Mrs. Yoon flipped through the newspaper, as if each page was a verdict. When she finally looked up at Harin, there was a question unspoken. How long will you keep up this lie? The press interview will be tomorrow, the matriarch announced. I want you to be impeccable. And what should I say? Harin asked, almost as a restrained challenge, that you are grateful. That's all, gratitude. The word burned in her throat like bile. Grateful for being pushed into a loveless marriage? For being used as a patch for a torn reputation? But she didn't argue, not yet. Because something was in motion. Something even Mrs. Yoon didn't know about. That same afternoon, Harin went to the old servant quarters. She needed to retrieve a box of belongings she had left behind. Upon entering the small room where she had slept for years, she found everything exactly as she had left it. The thin mattress, the broken radio, the notebooks filled with poems she wrote in secret. But there was something new there, an envelope. With her name handwritten on it. She hesitated before opening it. The paper was thick, perfumed, sealed with a familiar symbol. When she read the contents, her hands began to tremble. It was a letter, written by Min Seo, the missing bride. A letter with instructions, secrets, and a warning. If you are reading this, it's because I've left. But they don't know half of what I've discovered. Be careful with what you accept. Be careful with what you reveal. The words echoed in Harin's mind like a late warning. Min Seo knew something. Something big. Something involving the Han family. And somehow she trusted Harin to keep her expose it. But why? They were never close. They never exchanged more than cold phrases in narrow corridors. So, why leave that letter to her? The next day, the interview went on as scheduled. Cameras, lights, journalists. Harin sat next to Ji Woo like a porcelain doll. She answered, with a rehearsed smile, spoke of unexpected love and destiny. But inside, every word was poison. Ji Woo maintained control, but occasionally looked at her with eyes that silently asked for forgiveness. But it was already too late. After the press conference, Harin locked herself in the room. She picked up the letter again and reread every line. Among the paragraphs, a name was underlined, Dr. Kang. A doctor, connected to the family's clinic, and a sentence cut in half. He knows about the dossier hidden in the attic. The ink faded as if Min Seo had been interrupted while writing. Harin decided to act. That same night, she climbed up to the mansion's attic, place no one had visited in years. The wooden boards creaked under her steps, and the smell of dust mixed with the cold of dawn. She searched for hours until she found a box of documents stamped with the Han Clinic seal. Inside, medical records. Many of them. And among them, one in particular with a name that made her fall to her knees. Her own mother's name. Her mother had been a patient at the clinic years ago. But the file stated she had died under suspicious circumstances. Something didn't add up. Something was hidden. And now, Harin was no longer just the maid. She was part of the family. And that gave her access. But also danger. As she descended from the attic, she came face to face with Ji Woo, waiting at the bottom of the stairs. His eyes were dark, he knew, or at least suspected. And at that moment, for the first time, she realized that the forged marriage could become more than just a facade. It could be a silent war, where both were prisoners, and something more. Without saying a word, he extended his hand, not like at the wedding, but as if to say, if we're going to fall, let's fall together. And she, in silence, accepted, not out of love, not yet, but because she had nowhere else left to run. The phone ringing at 3 a.m. wasn't a mistake. It was an invitation to the next move in this silent game. Harin answered with her voice caught in her throat, her heart still beating to the rhythm of the discovery she had made. In the attic. The voice on the other end was calm, deep, almost clinical. Come to the administrative wing of the clinic. Alone. before they do to you what they did to her. The call dropped before she could ask for a name. But she knew who it was. Dr. Kang. As she walked through the streets of Seoul under the fine, constant rain, Harin wore a black hooded coat, her hands trembling in her pockets, her eyes avoiding any reflection that might expose her. The city seemed asleep, but there was a strange hum in the air, as if the streetlights were whispering that she shouldn't be there. And yet, she went. Because now the truth consumed her more than fear. Dr. Kang was waiting at the end of a narrow hallway in a windowless office. He was a middle-aged man with a marked face and exhausted eyes. When he saw her, he didn't smile. He simply locked the door behind her and pointed to the chair. On the table, a folder with documents, photos, and medical reports. Your mother didn't die of heart failure. She was subjected to an experimental treatment that was never authorized. She was used as a test subject by someone who couldn't risk their own reputation. Harin clasped her hands in her lap, trying to process the words. The letters on the documents danced before her eyes. The names of those responsible, the signatures, all pointed to a single culprit. Ji-woo's own father. Mr. Han had authorized the experiment, forged documents, and erased the traces. But for some reason, he let her name, her mother's, slip through. A mistake. Or a warning. Why are you showing me this now? Harin asked, her voice steady, because Min-seo knew. She found out everything weeks before the wedding. And before she vanished, she sent me copies of these documents. She said you were the only one who could change the story. Back at the mansion, Ji-woo was waiting for her. He was standing on the balcony, his face wet from the rain. When he saw her approaching, he didn't ask where she had been. He simply said that he had dreamed of the past, and that in it, she was smiling. Harin didn't respond. Instead, she handed him the folder. He didn't take it. He just looked at her with devastated eyes. I already knew. I just didn't want you to know too. Those words hit Harin like blades. Knowing that he knew, that he had carried that burden and still led her to the altar, made her question whether what she felt for him was truly love, or just misunderstood loneliness. Ji-woo tried to explain. He said he didn't condone what his father did, that he tried to protect Min-seo, but she had already made her decision, and that when he saw Harin in that house so close to the line of fire, he couldn't stop the impulse to pull her in. As if there, in the eye of the storm, she could be safer than on its edge. The next morning, Mrs. Yoon called a meeting. Everyone was in the room: Go-woo, Harin, the father, the brothers, the lawyers. The environment was cold, despite the luxury. The patriarch's face was neutral, but his eyes sparkled with arrogance. He said he would investigate Min-seo's disappearance, that he regretted her departure, but now the family needed to stand together. He looked directly at Harin. You are a Han now. Act like one. It was a command disguised as acceptance. Harin swallowed hard, but said nothing. Something inside her was starting to change. She was no longer the girl from the laundry room, no longer the invisible maid. She was a woman with a story to tell. And now, with evidence in hand, she could challenge everything they called family. Days passed in silence. She and Ji-woo barely spoke. He locked himself in the mansion's study, and she spent hours in the old library reading contracts and clinic records. Until one night, while going down to get water, she heard a whisper coming from the dark living room. It was Gi-woo's younger brother, Woo-jin, talking to someone on the phone. She knows everything. If she opens her mouth, we lose everything. We need to act first. From that moment on, Harin knew she couldn't trust anyone anymore. Not even Ji-woo's apparent passiveness. The house that had once served as a silent prison was now an invisible battlefield. And love, if it still existed, hung by a thread far too thin. That week, the matriarch fell ill. She was admitted to the family's hospital. The media wasn't informed. The family remained silent. Harin was the only one authorized to visit her. In the dark room, with machines beeping softly, Mrs. Yoon held her daughter-in-law's hand with a strength that didn't match her condition. Protect this family's name, even if everyone here is wrong. Sometimes, it's the lie that holds. Order together. Harin left that room with more questions than answers. Outside the hospital, the wind was sharp. Ji-woo was waiting, leaning against a column, as if he had predicted the exact time. He said nothing, just walked beside her for a few minutes in silence, until they stopped in front of an empty cafe. Inside, they sat across from each other. He took a small box from his pocket and slid it across the table. It was Min Seo's engagement ring. She gave it to me before she left. Said it belonged to whoever had the courage to stay. Harin touched the ring delicately. She didn't take it. She knew I didn't want to stay, she said, eyes filled with tears. But now, I think I have no choice. In that moment, for the first time, Ji-woo allowed himself to break down. He spoke about the weight of carrying a surname built on silent pacts, of a childhood marked by affectionless dinners, of nights locked in his room while his father manipulated everything around them. He said that loving Harin was the only true gesture he dared to feel. But he never knew how to love her without hurting her. The following night, documents began disappearing from the library. The attic was locked. Ji-woo's computer was hacked. The house was defending itself, as if it were a living organism repelling the truth. And Harin understood. Either she destroyed it from the inside, or she would be destroyed completely. On the bedroom balcony, under the snow that began to fall softly, she wrote a letter. Not to Ji-woo, but to Min Seo. A reply that might never be read, and in it she wrote, "You ran because you were smart. I stayed because I'm stubborn. But I promise, if I fall, I'll take everyone with me." The snow kept falling, and the city lights flickered in the distance. Harin, wearing the white silk robe she inherited along with the title of wife, looked at her reflection in the glass. She no longer saw the maid, nor the bride. Only a woman caught between two impossible choices, remain silent as always, or speak until no one could pretend not to hear. The news came like a cold breeze. The patriarch of the Han family had been hospitalized after suffering a mysterious fall in the bathroom of his suite. The official version said it was an accident, but nothing in that house happened without a hidden intention. Harin learned about it from the housekeeper, who whispered the information as if afraid the walls themselves might hear. When she arrived at the hospital, he was already sedated, surrounded by doctors trusted by the family. Ji-woo was there, but their eyes didn't meet. It was as if they now lived in parallel stories, connected only by a past that refused to die. In the silent hospital corridors, Harin encountered Woo Jin, the younger brother, standing in front of the vending machine. He looked at her with a cynical smile, as if he knew something she didn't. "Watch out for slippery steps, sister-in-law," he said, in a tone that didn't sound like a simple warning. And before she could respond, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind a sentence that felt like part of a much larger puzzle. Harin walked alone to the hospital cafeteria, where the lighting was dim and the sound of rain tapping on the windows created a melancholic soundtrack. She ordered a ginger tea, like she used to in her older days, and sat by the window. There, memories came back with force, of when she used to visit her hospitalized mother years ago. How the nurses ignored her, the absence of explanations, the funeral without a body, the pain without answers. And now, with documents in hand, everything was starting to make sense. Only that sense came with a price far too high. While drinking her tea, she saw something that made her freeze. Across the street, in front of the hospital, standing under a black umbrella, was Min Seo. It couldn't be. The facial features were unmistakable. The way she held the umbrella handle, the posture of her neck, even the way she looked at the buildings. Harin jumped up and ran to the door, ignoring the attendant's protests. But when she reached the sidewalk, she was gone. Like a ghost. As if she had never been there at all. That night, back at the mansion, Harin could barely sleep. The image of Min Seo in the rain haunted her. Was she hallucinating? Or had Min Seo returned to finish what she started? Deep down, a part of her knew. No one disappears completely without leaving traces. Especially someone like Min-Eo. The next day, Jiwoo asked to talk on the terrace of the house. It was a gray morning, the sky covered with heavy clouds, and the air smelled of wet earth. He looked worn out, as if he hadn't slept in days. When she approached, he offered her a cup of coffee, but she declined. "We need to talk about Min Seo's letter," he said bluntly. "I received one too, but I hid it. Because I was afraid of what it would do to us." Harin felt her stomach turn. "You had the chance to stop all this, and did nothing?" "I tried to protect you," he replied, his eyes red. "But now I see I only threw you into the middle of the storm." She didn't answer. She just turned to look at the garden, where the winter flowers were beginning to bloom between dry branches. A beautiful garden, but fake. Like almost everything. In that house. Jiwoo approached and gently touched her shoulder. "If I said I would do everything differently, would you believe me? I would, if you had the courage to help me now." That afternoon, they decided to act together. Not for love, but for justice. They agreed they needed to make the documents public, but first, confirm whether the clinic's records still held compromising information. They planned a secret visit at dawn, when the building would be under maintenance and only internal. Security would be on duty. Harin would disguise herself as a night cleaning staff member. Jiwoo would pose as an IT technician from the hospital network. Hours later, wearing a dark blue uniform, a mask over her face, and a fake badge on her chest, Harin entered the clinic's main corridor, her heart nearly stopping at each step. Jiwoo was on another floor, connecting to the central system to temporarily disable the cameras. They had 28 minutes. Anything longer, and the risk would be irreversible. In the archive room, Harin found the door locked with a digital key. She remembered what Dr. Kang had said. The password was Min Seo's birth date. She entered it. Nothing. Tried again. On the third attempt, the door opened with a soft click. Inside hundreds of boxes. She needed just one, the one containing the records from 2002, the year her mother disappeared from the facility. She found the file. But she found something else. A report signed by another doctor. And it wasn't Dr. Kang. It was someone named Seo Hwan, and in it, a handwritten note. Patient transferred to secondary facility under protocol PS. Do not disclose to family. Harin felt her head spin. There was a secondary facility? Her mother hadn't died there? On the upper floor, Jiwoo warned through the earpiece. The guards were returning to the sector. They needed to leave. She hid the documents under her uniform, erased her traces, and exited through the service elevator. On the sidewalk, under the same persistent rain from the previous days, the two exchanged silent glances. Nothing was said. But both knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the truth. Back at the mansion, they found Woo Jin in the library, flipping through a poetry book. When he noticed their presence, he calmly closed the book and said, "It's no use. Everything you think, is just the surface." Harin stepped forward. "Where is the secondary facility?" "Oh, so you've gotten that far." He smiled, but there was no humor in his face. "Ask our mother. That woman who pretends to be fragile, but has always known everything." The next morning, Harin went back to the hospital. Mrs. Yoon was better, sitting up with makeup on, as if the illness had been just a strategic pause. When Harin mentioned Protocol PS, she didn't pretend to be surprised. She simply replied, "Some stories must die so others can survive. But you chose to dig up what was buried. Now bear the consequences." That same day, the phone rang again. It was Dr. Kang. His voice sounded urgent, frightened. "They know you were at the clinic. You need to get out of that house, now." But it was too late. The mansion doors were already locked, and the hallways, for the first time, were in absolute silence, as if they were waiting for something, or someone. The mansion was so quiet that the sound of Harin's breathing seemed to echo through the walls. She walked slowly, her feet almost floating across the polished floor, as if stepping on memories. The lights were dimmer than usual. Some bulbs flickered. The house felt like it was standing watch, like a living body sensing an invasion. She knew something was about to happen. She didn't know when or from where it'd come. She only knew it was inevitable. Wu was nowhere to be found. His room was empty. The study was locked. The car in the garage was gone. Harin felt her heart sink. Had he abandoned her? Or was he trying to protect her again in his own distorted way? She tried to call, but the call went straight to voicemail. The feeling of being alone returned to burn in her chest. A different kind of loneliness than she had known before. Now it was loneliness filled with too many secrets to carry alone. In the library, she found Wu Jin again. He was flipping through old family photo albums. When he saw her, he raised an eyebrow and smiled almost gently. "Do you like puzzles, sister-in-law?" he asked, twirling a photo between his fingers. Sometimes the missing piece is hidden in the frame, or behind a smile, or between two lies. "Where is Giwu?" she asked without hesitation. "Where he's always been, trying to save a world that already collapsed." He stood up, let the photo fall to the floor, and walked past her like a passing memory. Before leaving, he whispered, "If you want answers, go to the lake house, but go alone. Bring courage, and don't expect to return the same." The lake house was 2 hours away, on the outskirts of Incheon. It was a family property, used occasionally for medical retreats and private meetings. Harin knew that place was beyond the reach of the press, beyond the reach of the police, beyond the reach of justice. She grabbed a thick coat, took the documents, hidden at the bottom of her suitcase, and left without telling anyone. When she arrived, night had already fallen. The house was dark. Only the back porch light remained on, as if someone was waiting for her. She climbed the steps cautiously, each one heavier than the last. The door was ajar, and the sound coming from inside was familiar, an old song playing on a scratched vinyl. It was her mother's favorite song. That wasn't a coincidence. It was an invitation, or a trap. In the living room, sitting in front of the fireplace, was Min Seo. Her hair was tied in a simple bun, wearing a gray sweater, as if she had never disappeared. She slowly turned when she noticed Harin's presence and smiled with a serenity that didn't match the chaos she had left behind. "You came. I knew you would. You've always been braver than anyone thought." "Why did you come back?" Harin asked, her voice choked. "Why did you disappear like that?" Min Seo stood up, walked to a sideboard, and picked up a small box. She opened it, revealing a flash drive. "Because I had to run before they silenced me. Because you were the only one who could do what I couldn't. And because there are things you still don't know." Harin said nothing. She simply extended her hand. Min Seo handed her the flash drive like someone passing on a heavy inheritance. "Everything is in there. Recordings, reports, intercepted conversations. Your father died in the clinic, but not by accident. He was removed on purpose, because he knew too much. Your mother tried to stop it. That's why they made her disappear." The revelation hit like an avalanche. Harin staggered back, leaning against the wall. The pain was physical, as if her stomach was being crushed. The pieces were finally falling into place, brutally. The truth wasn't just ugly, it was inhumane. The Han family wasn't just corrupt, they were predatory. And she was married into it. And Ji-woo? She asked at last, her voice shaky. Did he know? He knew part of it. He fought with what little he had, but he's broken too, Harin. He grew up in this system. He doesn't know how to be different, but he's not your enemy. They remained there for a while, in silence, like two survivors of the same fire, until Min Seo said, I have to disappear again. This time for good. But I'm leaving everything in your hands. Make it count. Hours later, Harin drove back down the wet road, the flash drive in her pocket and her heart in ruins. When she arrived at the mansion, Ji-woo was on the steps. Dirty, wounded, with a cut on his brow, she ran to him. What happened? They tried to stop me. But I found the location of the secondary facility. It's real. And it's active. With patience, with files, with stories that need to be told. The next morning, they took action. Harin sent copies of the documents and the flash drive to 3 independent journalists. One of them replied almost immediately. There would be a special report in 48 hours. With or without her permission. What had been done could no longer be ignored. When the report aired, the entire country was in shock. The Han name became synonymous with horror. Complaints multiplied. Investigations were launched. The clinic was shut down. And finally, the truth began to find space. But not without retaliation. The house was surrounded by reporters. The press camped at the gates. The board of directors was dissolved. The patriarch, still in the hospital, had an arrest warrant issued. Wu Jin fled the country, and Mrs. Yoon attempted to take her own life. She was saved but never spoke again. Harin was summoned to testify. She presented everything, exposed everything, and with tears in her eyes said, if loving someone means protecting them even when it hurts, then I loved. But I will never again stay silent for love. Ji-woo resigned from his position, distanced himself from the clinic, and gave up the inheritance. And in one final act of redemption, he wrote a public letter to the press. I was born into a lie. I lived as an accomplice. But I choose to die as someone who dared to change. On the last day of winter, Harin went to the sea. She was alone. She carried only a letter from her mother, found in the facility's archives, the handwriting. Trembling, but still filled with hope. My daughter, if you ever find this, know that silence was never an option. And that I never stopped fighting for you. She read it, cried, and let the wind take the final page. Then she walked along. The cold sand, her feet sinking into time. The one who was once just the maid was now the voice of all those who had been silenced. The winter sea was still there, like an old spectator of a story no one dared to tell. The waves broke in a rhythmic way, as if they were writing and erasing, one by one, the memories of everything that had happened. Harin stood on the sand, alone, with the wind pushing her hair against her face, and her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. She wasn't crying anymore. There were no tears left. Only a kind of silence that comes after the war, the kind that needs no words, because everything has already been lost. And everything has already been survived. She had left the Han mansion a week earlier, without goodbyes, without scandals, without promises. She simply closed the door to her old room, the guest one, not the laundry, and walked out the front door with firm steps. Ji-woo watched everything from the balcony without asking her to stay. He knew he couldn't ask for anything else, and Harin knew she still loved him. But it was a contaminated love. A love that needed to die before it could be reborn. If it ever would. In the following days, Harin began living in a small apartment on the outskirts of Hongdae. A place where no one knew her name, where neighbors didn't ask where she came from or why she looked into the distance, like someone who had lost something she couldn't name. She worked at a local bookstore, no badge, no uniform, just a scarf over her hair and a notebook where she wrote down phrases overheard from customers, as if trying to rebuild the world through borrowed words. One night, while organizing a shelf of books on medical ethics, she received a message on her phone, a photo of a sunflower field, followed by a single sentence, "I thought you might want to see this." It was Ji Woo. She stared at the screen for long minutes before blocking the number, not out of anger, but because sometimes longing must be pushed away before it devours you again. The investigations into the clinic were still ongoing. Dr. Kang cooperated with the authorities. Woo Jin was located in Tokyo but resisted extradition. Mrs. Yoon lived in a psychiatric ward, silently apologizing to a mirror that never replied. And Mr. Han died before the trial, leaving behind only a letter with the word "sorry" written. 39 times, none of them enough, the media tried to turn Harin into a symbol. But she refused interviews, stepped away from the spotlight, fled from awards. She knew pain wasn't a spectacle, and she didn't want to be remembered as a martyr nor as a heroine. She just wanted to exist. And that, for someone who had been erased their entire life, was already a kind of victory. One day, as she was leaving the bookstore, she saw a little girl sitting on the sidewalk, reading a torn notebook with intense concentration. Harin knelt down, offered her a new pencil, and asked what she was writing. The girl replied, "My story, but I don't know the ending yet." Harin smiled for the first time in months. She gently touched the girl's hair and said, "The ending doesn't have to be pretty. It just needs to be yours." The following month, she visited her mother's grave, now with her full name, correct dates, and an inscription written by Harin herself. She loved in silence, endured in silence, but now rests in peace. She left a flower, lit a candle, and sat beside the grave for hours, like someone finally finding the time that had been stolen. When spring came, Harin didn't notice. She only realized it when bookstore customers started buying more romance novels than dramas. One of them asked if she could recommend a story about new beginnings. She thought about saying no, but replied, "There's one, but it's still being written." One Sunday, she returned to the old cafe where she used to sit with Ji-woo in the early days of their marriage. She ordered the same ginger tea, sat at the same table. She expected to feel anger, but all she felt was longing. Not for the man, but for the woman she had been while believing it was possible. Min Seo was never seen again. But from time to time, Harin would receive a letter without a sender, with pressed flowers inside and handwritten poems. She never replied, never showed anyone. She kept them all in a wooden box with a white ribbon at the back of her closet. It was the only thing she didn't want to let go of. One day, as she was closing the bookstore, she found a note stuck to the window. "Sorry I didn't choose you before the chaos. But if one day your story accepts a semicolon, I'll be waiting on the other side of the comma." The handwriting was Jiwoo's, and for the first time she cried, not out of pain, but because she understood that not all love has to end together to be real. She walked up the hill overlooking the city. It was a place no one usually went to, where the noise was swallowed by the trees, where the sky felt closer. She sat down, opened the notebook where she used to write, and finally began drafting her own story, without following orders, without obeying anyone, without being just a supporting character. She wrote about the maid who became a bride, about the lie that became truth, about the love that became memory, and about the woman who, even without being invited to the ball, danced. As if the ballroom were hers, the pen moved slowly. As if each letter were a scar that now healed properly. The city lights began to flicker on, one by one. People walking, lives moving forward, stories beginning. And up there, Harin breathed for the first time without fear. She wasn't the same anymore, but she was still herself. And that, finally, was enough. If someone asks about happy endings, maybe she'll say that endings don't exist, only restart points. And if someone asks about love, she smile and reply, I knew it, and I survived it. If you've made it this far, this story touched you. The pain, the courage, the hidden truth between the lines. You felt it, Darin. Now share this with the world. Subscribe now to the channel for more stories like this. Stories that move your soul, warm your heart, and remind you why Asian doramas are unforgettable. Leave a comment. What would you do if you were Harin? Like, share, and come back often. This is your free dorama channel here on YouTube.